tried the first MCDM RPG Patreon playtest packet, the PPP. Let's chat about it, shall we? First, some disclaimers. Obviously, this is a playtest packet, so literally we had 20 pages that consisted of all the rules, and that was it. It sounds like there's going to be several more iterations of this, so this was just given to Patreon members, of which I am not, but a community member who is very interested in the MCDM RPG shared it with me and wanted me to get together a group from the community to play with him. And so I had the tremendous opportunity of being both a player and the director in this, partially because we had to split it into a couple sessions. And in the second session, our original director, the guy who was most interested in this, he unfortunately had other obligations. That meant he gave me the reins, and his minimal setup that he had in Foundry, I get to tell you from both angles. Was that a good thing? Who knows? Take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt, because anything at any moment will change. I will not be going over the general rules on how to play or anything like that. If you're just now hearing of the MCDM RPG, I'll put a link somewhere on here. Go watch some of their stuff about it and then come back and then we can discuss. The other thing I wanted to mention is I obviously played this offline, hence why I'm doing a video recap right now. That is partially because the community member, Justin, who reached out to MCDM, they kind of said, maybe don't stream it because it's so new. And I kind of agree with that because it is in its very earliest stages and they're still gathering feedback and there's still so much that's unknown about it. So we didn't stream it, but I figured I would at least give my take on it. And then I would also have a video to look back on when they fully release the game and we play it again to see how it compares. But also we know that my streaming history is very bad. Some other disclaimers. I had never heard of Matt Corville before this. Yes, I live under a rock. It's very cozy under there. But I had heard of Flee Mortals. I just never actually used that book. And a couple of their other publications I had heard of from MCDM, but I never used anything. So this is my first introduction to most of his content. You may leave your snide comment below. I don't care. I live under a rock. It's fine. So without going into the full MCDM RPG spiel, the biggest thing I think you can notice when you play this game is that they definitely focused on 4 words, which they talk about in their videos and even in the little playtest material. Those 4 words being tactical, heroic, cinematic, and fantasy. You definitely feel that is the direction that they are coming from. Like you can feel all 4 of those aspects throughout the entire playtest, which I thought was interesting, mostly because I am one of those people who likes that goal-focused thing anyway, that mentality. So I think that it really shows that they've put a lot of effort and love into it to keep it true to their vision of what this tabletop game should be. I'm only going to touch on rules that I feel like I need to explain where I'm coming from. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to wait because I feel like they're just gonna change everything. Not everything, but they might edit major aspects of this and then that kind of negates all my feedback anyway. I'm just going to focus kind of on the broader strokes, and we're going to start with me as a player because that's where I started. I was playing the Woad Elf Cloak and Dagger with a Cloak and Dagger kit. She was hella fun. In general, it seems like your kit kind of dictates your abilities, which is fabulous. So everybody had their own set of abilities. All of the characters were pre-generated, which is good. I will be interested to see in what character creation looks like later on, especially if you can make your own kits and that kind of thing. But that's a later conversation. Essentially, your abilities from your kit are powered by the number of victories you have. Not saying that if you don't have any victories for the day, you don't have some power. You do. You have this resource with victories that helps make your moves more powerful. And at first I thought that would be kind of rough in the beginning, right? You're first starting out the day, you're not going to have any victories, you're going to be kind of weak, kind of not as powerful as normal. I was quickly shown that that was not the case. One, you don't just gain victories through combat, you can gain victories through pretty much anything that the director dictates as a win, essentially. Like, you can't just go murder hoboing everywhere and think that you're going to get victory points, which I think is good. That kind of gets rid of that mentality of just fight everything. You can get victory points from obviously combat encounters, negotiations, from traps, from just finding certain things. I think that is a very interesting concept, and I wonder if you can use it in a way where you can encourage your players to do something over another thing. If you really want your players not to fight this and to take it into a more political negotiation standpoint, but you don't want to take away their ability to just fight whatever they want, maybe giving 2 victory points for a particularly tough negotiation or for negotiating instead of just fighting everything. I wonder if you can do that. I would have to look at the rules again, and I think that's something that you could even implement regardless, just as you get better at being a director. The other thing is with the Cloak and Dagger Kit, you also have another thing to track called Insight. Now, my understanding is a lot of the other characters had some sort of auxiliary resource to track. I didn't really look into all of them because it was enough to kind of get the regular rules down. And then being the director, I had other things that I was trying to keep track of. So I didn't really look into all of that for each individual character. Regardless, I do find that to be kind of fun, tracking your resources, seeing how many you have, gaining more as you get more victories. Like, that aspect of it was kind of rewarding in its own way. I think obviously as a director, you have to consider how many victories your players have. Obviously, you can't just throw the big bad guy at them as soon as they wake up. I mean, you could. That would probably force them to retreat, but that kind of thing you can't really do. But it also takes away that need for players to long rest in the middle of a dungeon before they get to the big bad. So I think that ends up making it better than, say its D&D counterpart. I do think that it helps push people to explore dungeons more. I've had plenty of dungeons, pre-made or otherwise, where the characters just have a one-track mind, enter, are looking for the big bad, and then want to leave. And that means that they don't really experience everything in that dungeon, but they're doing that because they have limited resources. They don't think that they can sleep in a dungeon, which you really can't. And, they don't want to waste all their spells before they get to the big bad. I think with this system, that kind of is eliminated completely because you almost want to go into the next room so you have more victories, so your points for whether it's Insight or whatever go up so that you can do cooler moves and you can do them more often. The only thing that I think comes into play there is your hit points and restoring your hit points. I think that resource is what will determine how many rooms you go into. That aspect of it I thoroughly enjoy more than some other tabletop games out there. Another big aspect is the Boons and Banes part of combat. I feel like I underutilize this both as a director and as a player, and I think that will just come with playing it more often with people who help remind me to use them. Since you hit every time, no matter what, you're doing damage, which is good, and it helps you feel like you're always progressing. I at first thought that would make it kind of almost boring, right? Because there is no chance you're not going to miss, right? You're always going to make progress. At first I thought that would make it more boring, but now that I've thought about it more, I think that's my problem. I think I wasn't utilizing Boons and Banes well because I was thinking of, well, how do I do damage? What move gets me damage? I wasn't thinking about how I could help other characters do more damage or how I could hinder the enemy's damage. I wasn't really thinking in that aspect. I wasn't thinking about how many D4 can I get on someone. And I think if I get into a combat encounter in this again, that's the mentality I'm going to come at it from, because I think that adds way more to it. part of the reason this was kind of hard for me, and part of the thing that makes combat kind of hard, and we'll talk about the Zipper initiative and all of that in a minute. I don't know what other characters can do. Since I didn't know that, I wasn't able to fully utilize my abilities to help them do something cooler. That, I think, comes with playing over time. I think that comes with more discussion. So the Zipper initiative is where I think that discussion part should happen, right? That figuring out who's doing what. The problem there is it makes discussion and turns so long. That's a big problem in 5e. I think it's not as bad as 5e with this system, but I do think it makes it take a long time because people are indecisive. There are a few people who they know what they're going to do. They know how it could affect other people. There's also that opposite group that is like, oh, you go first, and I get it. Part of that is we don't know each other's moves. We don't know how to work together quite yet. That will be built upon over time. That discussion made combat super long. Most combat took about 4 rounds. I don't know in general if that's good or bad because you can't compare it to D&D 5e because the rounds are just, it's similar but different. It took about an hour for every encounter, maybe longer depending on, I wasn't really timing it the first time, but when I was director, it definitely took an hour. I think it's partially because people are indecisive, they don't know what each other are doing, and then it just takes a long time to discuss things. They do mention a rule where they're like, you could take out a timer. I hate that mentality. I don't like trying to pressure my players into deciding something. I found that when we were playing, especially when I was a director, it was more like there wasn't a lot of discussion happening. It was like, I don't know, you should go. I don't know. It was not, oh, I can do this, so I should go first. It was like, well, maybe I can take my turn if you guys don't want to. And I think that would change the more we play, but it was just something I kind of didn't like about the Zipper initiative. I also hated the tracking of Zipper initiative. Now, when I was a player, I thought I was worried about it. And then when I was a director, it came true. It's super rough to monitor as the director. Not only are you keeping track of which player went first, right? Which is fine. I think most players are pretty honest. They'll be like, oh, I didn't go, or no, you did, they're gonna be pretty straightforward about that kind of stuff. However, having to monitor 5 players and then my 4 different groups of enemies, and then keeping track of who went when. We had Foundry. Obviously, nothing is set up in Foundry for this RPG, so it was just more like for the map. So what I ended up doing was writing it all down, which, that's my thing. I ended up and I'll show you because why not? I have it right here. I just wrote everybody's name down, and then I had this little section here where I wrote in the enemies' names, and this is like a dry erase sheet, and I just track turns like that and your triggers because you only get 1 per round, that kind of thing. It was a nightmare. And even tracking things, I felt like I messed up a couple times, which is fine. There was just too much to manage though. On top of managing initiative, you also have to think strategically. As a director, it's way harder because you don't have an additional 4 brains helping you think strategically. Now, my players weren't they weren't discussing quite to that extent, which honestly would have probably helped me as a director because then I know what they're planning and then I can kind of stop it or prepare for it in certain ways. Though that would kind of hinder, that would almost be metagaming at that point. So I don't know how far I would take that mentality, but it kind of helps you know what direction they're kind of going in. But they didn't do a lot of discussion, so it was a little bit hard for me to figure out what to do with my creatures. So not only are you managing initiative, which I guess I could pass off to your players, so that could solve that issue as well. But you're also dealing with new enemies, new creatures, which again, maybe you use the same one throughout the adventure, but I feel like part of the fun of being a director is bringing new, crazier baddies into the picture. And then there's also trying to strategize while listening to your players' turns and all of that. And the creatures themselves did have what we were given for the playtest. They had goals, right? So certain minions, their goal was to push people into these spinning gears to hurt them. That was super useful, but I still can see this being super hard for a director, at least in the beginning. Maybe if you're more experienced in the game in general, then it would get easier. Maybe if you're making the encounters yourself, it would get easier. From this first go, it seemed pretty hard. Side note, I definitely played minions wrong because I hadn't played Flea Mortals, which is like where I guess a lot of the minion stuff is introduced. Me playing the minions wrong probably contributed to that. A side note, it could be different with different enemies. You know, in a big boss battle, maybe it wouldn't seem as hopeless for the director. I really only ran one encounter, one combat encounter. To judge everything based on just one encounter seems unfair. I honestly think a lot of my complaints could probably benefit from just more experience running these types of combat encounters. Another thing I want to touch on from kind of more of a player's perspective than a director's perspective is character growth. So this is more just a series of questions I have because there is no character development. Like there's no, here's your levels and all of that. I'm just very curious to know what that's gonna look like because they were all level 1. We were all pretty badass for level 1, okay? And I think that's kind of the point. You're a hero, you're not just some Joe Schmo at level 1. How do you make something that's badass even badassier? Like, how do you make that better? Like, I'm interested to see how you make improvements to characters because giving too many options will be overwhelming for some people. Already, it has quite a few options and enough diversity to give you choices, but not so much that it's overwhelming, which I really enjoy. If you level up and it brings in another set of things, and then by level 5, you have 30 different options, that would obviously be too much. So I'm interested to see what character growth will look like. And I'm also interested to see what it looks like from a spellcaster's perspective. I am a druid at heart, so I know that can get overwhelming. In fact, I know, like, my husband, who played a bard for a long time, he didn't even change out his spells every day, okay? He had a set list and he never changed them ever again, which we argued about sometimes. He did that because it was too many choices. There's too many options. I just wonder how that will go. Are you going to power up the abilities you already have? Or is it like swapping different abilities? Like, I'm just interested in general on where that'll go. So the only other thing I really want to touch on is the negotiations. I only got to this from a player perspective, and to me, I just am mentioning it because I feel like it's an important aspect of the game that people will want to know about. But for me personally, I don't think I can say whether I liked it or not, because to me, it was kind of confusing. And that was just from a player perspective. I did not run a negotiation, and reading about it from more of a director perspective, it seems more interesting than typical interactions you have with NPCs in D&D. I just couldn't wrap my head around it, and that could just be me and being the tired mom that I am. Negotiations and stuff, I can't really comment on because I just don't feel like if I commented on it right now, it would be a fair assessment. I just need more experience with both running them and doing more negotiations. Overall, though, the adventure itself was pretty fun and cool, and just the environment was nice. Overall, I liked it. Is it better than 5e? Not sure yet. I'd have to play it more, to be honest. But is it fun? Definitely. I definitely had a lot of fun as a player and a director. I'm super excited to see what the final product will be like, or even what they do with the feedback from this playtest, because they seem like they are actually listening to their community, which is always super good. Things don't get better if you're closed-minded. So the only thing I do hate about the overall thing with MCDM is I absolutely hate the idea that they're working on another VTT. And this is just like a personal thing. I don't want to have to pay a subscription for another software that I only use for one type of game. I like Foundry because I can play all sorts of games in it. Pathfinder, D&D, I've done Call of Cthulhu a little bit in there. It's still like not the best system for all of those games. I don't want to pay for D&D's whatever VTT they're coming out with either. I don't want another subscription. I like Foundry. I've spent a lot of time in Foundry getting it to be the way I want it to be. I guess I would just prefer if they did something like Paizo, where they work hand in hand with someone at Foundry and then create something, because you can still have control over the feel of your VTT while passing it off to someone else who is an expert in that field, okay? You don't have to do everything yourselves. And I don't know if that's the actual thought process behind it. Like they're actually like, we need to control it or something. It feels like everyone wants to nickel and dime the DM and like, I'm already paying for your books. I will pay for all the content. I've even paid for double for some things because I wanted it in a digital format. Don't nickel and dime us. At least if you're gonna make a VTT, I hope it's not super expensive, because as much as I love the hobby, it's an inexpensive hobby. And I also have gaming as the other hobby. So I've got an expensive livelihood. Overall, would recommend so far. I am interested to see where things go. If you're interested in joining the future playtests, the Patreon packets, this is not for everyone, I don't think. I feel like it's for people who are really willing to give feedback and help develop the game. And you have to be willing to actually play the game when they release the playtests, etc. If you're interested in doing that, you should sign up for their Patreon. I'll put a link in the description. I'd be interested to hear anybody else's take on this. So if you've played the MCDM RPG and have thoughts, put it down below. If you just have been following their campaign and etc. and just want to talk about it, you can also jot that down there because I'm interested. And then, of course, this was run in my community on Discord. So if that's something you're interested in, or you also have game systems you want to try out and you need to find some willing guinea pigs, there's probably some in my community. So you can join them also down there or up here. I don't know. There's just find some links. They're there. All right. And I will see you guys next Friday, hopefully. Bye.